Hey everybody, it's Rabbit. Welcome to the channel, and today we're actually going to be doing a viewer requested video for the first time. This is going to be a guide on the M-51 Super Sherman for Israel, and this was requested by the Skyrim guide. Now, as far as viewer requested videos, one thing I do want to clarify just to make sure everybody's aware of this. This is currently kind of a one-man show. My videos are not currently monetized, and I don't really have any sponsors. So as much as I want to get your requests, and I have seen them, and I do check the comments pretty regularly, my capacity to get to any specific topic may be limited, so I can't guarantee when or if we're going to get around to it. But the specific reason why I selected this topic is because A, it's a decent follow-on for our video on how to unlock Israel as a faction, and obviously that will get you the starter vehicles. And also, the M-51 is not exactly the most user-friendly vehicle to use, so it seemed like it would be a good topic for a video to kind of help anybody out who might be interested in getting into the Israeli faction. Now, first off, we do have to kind of address the elephant in the room, not just with the M-51, but with the Israeli tech trees in general. The Israeli tech trees, despite starting at rank 4, start you at basically unskilled crews. Most enemies that you fight will have around 15 to 30 skill in their crew at this point. They might even have significantly more if they, have already gone through the entire tech tree and they're coming back. So you're going to be at a pretty big disadvantage, and we're going to see how this hampers you in a lot of different areas. If you did pick up one of the pack vehicles do come with GE. It's not the worst idea in the world to use some of those GE for accelerated crew training. If you didn't, my priorities for crew training would be targeting on the gunner, because that helps you get your gun on target faster. And at very low levels of targeting, your gunner will go horizontally and then vertically, whereas if you get the targeting high enough, they will go horizontally and vertically at the same time. So that helps a lot. Next, I would either go range finding or driving, and it kind of just depends on how good you are at guessing distances. If you're good enough at guessing distances, you don't really need the range finding. You can just go for driving and make the vehicles more responsive. But if you're not very good at guessing ranges, I would definitely recommend range finding, because landing your first shot accurately is just more important. And then after that, you can go over stuff like reloading, and then the commander's leadership, and then vitality, etc, etc, etc. But those are the skills I would go with first. Now, for the M-51 itself, as far as protection, it's easy to just say it has no armor and knock off for lunch, but it is a fully enclosed vehicle. It has enough frontal armor to at least be semi-resistant to autocannons. You have some level of roof armor, so you're not completely vulnerable to planes. It's not as bad as it theoretically could be, but you do kind of have to assume that if an enemy tank draws a bead on you, they're probably going to be able to punch through and one-hit kill you at basically any range. And this is also where we get a bit of an issue with the crew skills, because the M-51 does have 5-man crew and does have a decently spaced out interior. The real problem you're going to run into is that with low crew skills, you're obviously going to have low crew vitality, so your crew are going to be easier to kill. Additionally, low crew skills also means you get fuel explosions more often, which can also lead to additional deaths. Neither of these happen all the time or come up all the time, but it can be a little frustrating. That being said, it's pretty uncommon that the M-51 survives a direct hit and is still able to fight back, so you'll basically be reliant on your teammates at that point. So a lot of times you do just die anyway, even if you survive the first hit, but you can get some unnecessary deaths due to low crew skill. Now, in terms of mobility, you're going to take another hit on not having a skilled crew here as well, because having very low skills on your driver definitely contributes to the vehicle feeling a lot more sluggish. And to be honest, not just the M-51s, but a lot of the Israeli tanks like the Magaks and the Shoats have incredibly poor stock mobility. So a lot of these tanks can feel awful to play until you start getting some ranks into that driving skill. For what it's worth, I don't find myself hating the mobility when it's fully upgraded and when you have a good driver, at least not in the forward gears. The M-51's reverse gear, however, is somewhat poor, and that does kind of get on my nerves from time to time, but it's not catastrophic. One thing that I will say is that the M-51 is smack dab in the middle of the armor meta, so a lot of your opponents are fairly sluggish as well, so you're not competing with incredibly fast vehicles most of the time. Additionally, the M-51 doesn't really want to be in the thick of it, so having lower mobility forces you to play more cautiously, which is actually kind of beneficial for how the tank wants to be used. And next up we get to the main event for the M-51, the gun, and this is basically the entire reason why this tank exists and is at 6-0. The gun is a 105mm French cannon firing heat rounds. The heat rounds have a total penetration of 400mm. Obviously, on low crew skills, as we discussed with the gunner, it will negatively affect your ability to get the gun on target and to reload the cannon, which will make it feel more sluggish and responsive than it will if you had a much higher crew skill. Now, heat rounds have a built-in set of advantages and drawbacks just for being a heat round. One of the advantages is that range really doesn't matter in terms of your penetration. You basically keep the same pen at all ranges. The other advantage is that heat rounds, especially ones like this 105 that have a decent sized explosive mass, overpressure open top vehicles very consistently and will even sometimes overpressure lightly armored fully enclosed vehicles, but that's very inconsistent. And speaking of inconsistency, this is the real problem with heat rounds. Sometimes heat rounds just don't do damage. What I mean by that is the post-pen effect, sometimes it just doesn't do anything. It's kind of weird and it's very inconsistent. Additionally, heat rounds use a cone of damage versus a sphere when they penetrate the vehicle, like the APAG rounds that you might be used to from other countries, and like how other countries currently use in the game that you'll be fighting. So your internal damage is going to be a lot more concentrated in an area than basically everybody else you fight. And this does lead to a problem in that it means you have to be familiar with internal layouts. You have to aim for specific modules or specific crew members to actually knock them out. You can't just try to get around into the enemy's crew compartment and hope for the best, which is what you can definitely do with most APAG rounds. While I have seen some people complain about the M-51 shells, I haven't noticed them being any worse than any normal heat rounds. If anything, the incredibly high penetration compared to the vehicles you're shooting at has made them more consistent, but you do still have a lot of the normal heat round problems. Additionally, you just start with your best shell, so that also helps because the stock grind on this vehicle would be absolutely awful if you started with something crappy like ABCR. So it does at least make it a little less painful, but the stock grind, especially with low crew skills, can still be pretty rough. Now, because accurate shot placement is very important with the M-51, you have to be able to disable key crew and key modules. You also kind of have to know where they are, and we're going to devote a section into going to where to shoot the vehicles of various nations to cripple or kill them the fastest. And the first thing is just open top vehicles. This will include a lot of AAs, some light tanks, some tank destroyers. You can hit an open top vehicle anywhere with this shell. Sometimes you can even take them out with a near miss. The overpressure effect is quite good, and you can pretty much hit these vehicles anywhere, even the tracks. It will immediately knock them out. So that's easy enough. And the first nation we're going to look at is probably the easiest one to deal with, if I'm being honest. It's the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union doesn't like their tank crews, apparently, because they shove them all in a phone booth in the middle of the tank and throw some ammo in there just for good measure. This means that if you can just shoot in the middle of this cluster of troops, you can just kind of knock them out pretty consistently with no real problems. A lot of Soviet vehicles, this battle rating are just an armor penetration check. If you do have enough armor penetration, you can just click on the middle and kill them very easily. Just remember that 3 out of the 4 crew are usually in the turret, and that's another thing, is like Soviets go down to 4-man crews a lot faster than most other countries. Most other countries still have 5-mans at this point, so they are in general much easier to deal with. If you do have to know specific crew stations, such as you can only see the enemy's turret, or it's a turretless assault gun, the gunner and driver are usually on the right hand side, so shoot the right hand side, they can't move, they can't shoot, you're good to go. Just finish them off with another shot, usually to the left hand side, to finish off the remaining crew. The only vehicles that are kind of weird is if you're running something like a PT-76, or if you're running this in an up tier, you might run into a BMP. The only thing to note about these vehicles is that they have a big empty section in the back of the vehicle, and their engine is the front left-hand side. So you kind of want to avoid shooting those areas, but as long as you do that, you should pretty much knock them out in a single hit every time. They're overall pretty frail, and sometimes you do just overpressure them, so that's pretty nice. The next country we're going to look at is Germany, and Germany doesn't hate their crews quite as much. They do tend to space them out a good bit, especially in tanks like the King Tiger. However, they are nice enough to put their driver and their gunner on the right hand side in a line, so that actually still kind of makes them pretty easy to deal with. You just want to shoot on the right hand side, and you want to shoot a little over the driver's shoulder so that you're not directly hitting the driver, because if you directly hit the driver, he might absorb enough shrapnel to actually keep the gunner from getting knocked out. But as soon as you land around right over his shoulder, knock out the driver gunner, you just shift your aim to the left hand side, knock out the machine gunner and the loader, and then you're good to go. Easy enough. The only other vehicle that you're really going to see is the M-41, the Walker Bulldog. The M-41, you can mostly just hit it in the center of the hull. You can shoot it on the left-hand side of the turret to knock out the gunner, but it does have a commander's override, so the commander can fire the gun. So if your shrapnel only knocks out the gunner and the commander's alive, it can still shoot you. So I would advise just trying to knock out the gun on the Bulldog if you can't see the hull. If you can't see the hull, just hit the hull, you'll knock it out 9 times out of 10. The Bulldog is a relatively cramped tank, and it has crew and ammo in a nice tight space. And probably one of the more annoying opponents to deal with is actually USA. USA has the nice spacious interiors of the Germans, but doesn't put their gunner and their driver in a line. The gunner is on the left-hand side of the turret, the driver is on the right-hand side of the hull. So you usually want to aim for basically the left-hand side of the hull to try and get the radio operator and the gunner. You might get ammo, but it doesn't always happen. That way they can't shoot you. Getting the driver is nice, but if they can still kill you, it doesn't really help all that much. The Shermans actually end up being one of the more difficult opponents because they have stabilizers, they have good turret traverse, and they have fast-firing guns. And their guns aren't amazing, but they're still more than enough to deal with you. The saving grace to USA is that Israel usually gets put on the same side as USA, so while you do see the odd American vehicle in service with other nations, you don't often fight whole teams of them, so that's at least pretty nice. Now, as far as the Cold War vehicles, if you're using the M-51 in maxed out tiers, they're actually pretty easy to deal with. Pretty much all of them have 4-man crews, the T-54, the Leopard, the M-60, and they still don't have a level of armor that you care about, and they all put their crews in a pretty compact area, so you can just kind of shoot at the middle of the hull and kill any of these free vehicles from any range with no real problems, which is pretty nice if you're using it in higher tier lineups. Now, you could be forgiven for looking at the M-51 and thinking that what it really wants to do is snipe because it looks like it wants to snipe. It doesn't have the best armor, especially when confronted with enemy anti-tank guns. Your range keeps its penetration at any distance and can go through any target. The problem is you do kind of need to land relatively precise hits to consistently knock out enemies, or at least disable them and stop them from shooting back. And they don't really need to land that precise of a hit to kill you. And this was the issue that I kept running into with the M-51, is that you get a lot of inaccuracy and a lot of randomness on your shot the further away you get. So if you start stretching it out to like 1,000 meters or whatever, you can't always guarantee that the shell is going to go exactly where you're aiming, and that's kind of a problem. Meanwhile, the enemy doesn't need their shell to go exactly where they're aiming, they just need to usually hit you basically anywhere. So I haven't experienced that much success with the M-51 at longer ranges. I've experienced a lot more success at medium to close range, where I can pick out the parts of the enemy vehicle that I really need to knock out. You can even kind of brawl with it reasonably effectively because, as far as you're concerned, the enemy doesn't have armor. I mean, as far as they're concerned, you don't have armor either, but then it's just whoever can click accurately first. Now, the inconsistencies of heat round can make this a little dodgy at times, and again, especially if you have low crew skills, your ability to respond both with the hull and the turret might be a little more limited, but I have actually had some moderate success brawling with this, at least more consistently than I have had sniping. Really, you want a good medium range. You want enough distance between you and your opponent that you can retreat if possible. You also kind of want ambush positions where you already have the range known and you can line up your shot pretty easily and pretty quickly if they round a corner, etc., etc. In that respect, it mostly ends up playing more as a tank destroyer than a medium, but you can still kind of use it as a medium in a pinch. Overall, I would say the M-51 is a bit of an acquired taste. Personally, I find there's a lot of catharsis in dropping into the middle of the armor meta with effectively an armor negating gun, and taking out some of the most heavily armored tanks for their battle rating in the entire game with relative ease. And I like doing it in a Sherman. I personally just find the vehicle is fun to play, but I don't want to let my personal feelings on the vehicle get in the way of giving you good advice. It is definitely a very niche playstyle, and it's not necessarily suitable for everyone, and like I said, the lack of crew skills, and especially how painful this thing can feel stock, especially in terms of its mobility, do kind of get in the way of really enjoying it and having the kind of fun that you could have were the vehicle in a much better shape. However, the M-51 does have a major saving grace in that it does work well beyond its battle rating. You can take it all the way up into a 7-3 lineup and not really care. Even up to 7-3, there's really nothing you'll see outside of a handful of vehicles that will give your shell trouble, so it does work fantastically well in an up tier if you do get the hang of the gun and how to use it. And that's our video, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had fun. I hope you learned something about the M-51, and I hope this helps you grind your way through the Israeli tech tree. Because, like I said, I do really like the vehicle, and I kind of want other people to at least understand how to get the most out of it. But if it was helpful, please give a like, comment, and subscribe. As I said at the beginning of this video, this is a small channel. I need all the help I can get. That would be much appreciated. And have a nice day, everybody.